In the winter of 1947, Europe was not at peace. The guns had gone silent, but in cities from Vienna to Hamburg, the war was still present in every queue for bread, every coal department, every ruined railway yard, every coal cart that never arrived. In Britain, fuel shortages shut factories and darkened homes. In France and Italy, communist parties had emerged from wartime resistance with real popular strength. In Germany, millions lived among rubble, using cigarettes as money and trading heirlooms for food. Across the continent, hunger was becoming political. A family that could not heat a room did not debate ideology in the abstract. It asked which system could deliver coal, wages, bread, and order. Washington looked at this wreckage and saw more than suffering. It saw a vacuum. If Europe collapsed economically, the United States feared that democratic governments might fall without a Soviet tank crossing a border. On June 5, 1947, Secretary of State George C. Marshall stood at Harvard University and described a crisis that could not be solved by speeches alone. The world situation, he said, was very serious. His proposal was careful but enormous. Europe would have to design a common recovery program. The United States would help finance it. Behind the calm language was a brutal calculation. The next battle for Europe might be decided not by armies, but by food, fuel, steel, and machines. The Second World War had left Europe physically broken and economically trapped. Bridges were down, ports were damaged, rail lines were cut, mines lacked equipment, factories lacked raw materials, farmers could produce food. But cities had too few goods to exchange. Dollars were scarce, which meant governments could not easily buy American grain, oil, cotton, or machinery. Inflation ate wages. Black markets mocked official prices. Every shortage weakened confidence in the fragile post-war order. The United States had already drawn one line in March 1947 with the Truman Doctrine, promising support for Greece and Turkey against communist pressure. But Marshall and other officials understood that emergency aid to one country at a time would not be enough. Europe's economies were linked. French factories needed German coal. German recovery alarmed French security planners. Britain needed exports, but also imports. Italy needed food and stability before elections. If recovery remained national and competitive, old fears could return. That was why the Marshall Plan was designed as more than a relief fund. Washington offered help, but demanded European cooperation. Britain and France invited European governments to Paris in the summer of 1947. The aim was to make them list their needs together, bargain together, and plan recovery together. Former enemies had to sit at the same table and treat coal, steel, transport, and trade as shared problems. This was economics as diplomacy. The offer was not formally limited to the West. The Soviet Union was invited to discuss it, and so were governments in Eastern Europe. But the conditions mattered. A joint program would require information, coordination, and a degree of openness that Stalin could not accept. Soviet leaders saw the proposal as a Trojan horse. They feared American money would pull Eastern Europe out of Moscow's control, revive Germany under Western influence, and tie the continent to American markets. At the Paris talks, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov rejected the approach. Soon Moscow made clear that countries under Soviet influence were not free to decide for themselves. Poland and Czechoslovakia had shown interest, but they were forced to step back. The choice that appeared to be economic became openly geopolitical. By refusing the aid, Stalin kept control in the East, but he also made the division of Europe harder to reverse. In April 1948, President Harry Truman signed the Economic Cooperation Act. The European Recovery Program began. Over 4 years, the United States provided about $13 billion in assistance to participating countries. In today's terms, it was a massive commitment, but the money was not simply handed over as charity. Much of it arrived as food, fuel, raw materials, fertilizer, vehicles, and industrial equipment. Aid moved through ports, warehouses, factories, and rail networks. It was meant to restart production, not just fill empty stomachs. Administration also mattered. The Economic Cooperation Administration, led first by Paul Hoffman, watched how dollars were used and pushed recipients to remove bottlenecks. American officials did not run Europe, but they attached aid to reports, targets, and negotiations. That gave Washington influence without direct rule. European governments accepted the bargain because the alternative was worse: slow recovery, political unrest, and dependence on emergency loans that might vanish with the next crisis and no shared path forward. The distinction mattered. A shipment of wheat could calm hunger for a season. A machine tool could help a factory produce again. Cotton could restart textile mills. Coal could power trains and workshops. Fertilizer could raise harvests. Dollars could purchase imports that European governments could not otherwise afford. Local currency generated through aid sales often went into counterpart funds used for investment and reconstruction. The plan tried to turn outside assistance into domestic momentum. It also sold a political message. The Marshall Plan was advertised in posters, exhibitions, films, and traveling displays. Its symbol appeared on sacks, crates, and signs. Recovery trains crossed parts of Europe showing what cooperation and American-backed production could mean. The message was not subtle. Prosperity was presented as proof that democratic capitalism could deliver what communism promised. For hungry voters, propaganda alone would not work. But propaganda, attached to bread, coal, and jobs, had power. Italy became an early test. In 1948, the Italian election drew intense attention from Washington and Moscow. The Italian Communist Party was strong, disciplined, and rooted in real social anger. American aid did not decide every vote, but it helped the Christian Democrats argue that alignment with the West meant food, reconstruction, and access to markets. In April 1948, the Communists and their allies lost. For American policymakers, it seemed confirmation that economic recovery could contain political revolution. France faced similar pressure. Strikes, inflation, and communist strength made the Fourth Republic fragile. Marshall aid helped stabilize imports and production, while French planners pursued modernization. Yet the plan did not simply restore the old Europe. It pushed governments toward productivity, cooperation, and trade. It encouraged a future in which coal and steel would be managed across borders. That idea soon became central to European integration. The most sensitive case was Germany. No country symbolized the dilemma more clearly. A weak Germany could starve and destabilize the continent. A strong Germany could frighten its neighbors. The Marshall Plan tied West German recovery to a broader Western framework, making revival possible while embedding it in cooperation. In June 1948, the Western zones introduced the Deutsche Mark. Ludwig Erhard moved against price control. Goods reappeared on shelves, black market activity declined, and production began to climb. West Germany's later economic miracle had many causes, including currency reform, labor, policy choices, and the wider world economy. The Marshall Plan was not the only reason, but it supplied materials, confidence, and political framework at a decisive moment. To the United States, West Germany became a showcase. To the Soviet Union, it became a threat. The same month, the new currency appeared. Stalin tightened pressure on Berlin. The Berlin Blockade turned the economic division of Germany into a direct confrontation. The Marshall Plan did not create the Cold War, but it gave the conflict a working map. Western Europe was bound into an American-led recovery system. Eastern Europe was drawn deeper into Soviet command. In 1949, Moscow helped create the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, known as Comecon, to organize the economies of the communist bloc. In theory, it was a revived system of cooperation. In practice, it reinforced Soviet control and separated Eastern European trade from the Western recovery network. This was the hard edge of the plan's success. It rebuilt, but it also divided. Countries that accepted aid gained access to American resources and a growing Atlantic alliance. Countries forced to reject it entered a different future, shaped by state planning, Soviet priorities, and restricted contact with the West. The Iron Curtain was not only a line of soldiers, police, and ideology, it became a line of supply chains, currencies, factories, and trade rules. By 1952, the program had ended, but its effects remained. Western European production had recovered strongly. Shortages eased. Political center ground survived in countries where it had looked vulnerable. The Organization for European Economic Cooperation gave governments practice in joint management. The coal and steel community that followed in 1951 began tying former enemies into institutions that would later grow into the European Union. The Marshall Plan became a model for American statecraft because it joined moral purpose to strategic interest. It fed people, rebuilt industry, opened markets, strengthened allies, and contained Soviet influence at the same time. That mixture had made it admired, debated, and often misunderstood. It was not pure generosity, and it was not simple domination. It was a wager that prosperity could do what military occupation alone could not: make democracy durable. For Stalin, the plan threatened control. For Washington, it offered a way to stop communist expansion without starting another war. For Europeans, it meant different things depending on where they stood: bread, machines, pressure, dependence, hope, exclusion, recovery. Its legacy was born from that contradiction. In 1947, the future of Europe seemed to hang on empty coal bins and broken rail lines. By the early 1950s, the continent had been healed, but its western half had been anchored to a new order. The Cold War would still bring crises, armies, walls, and nuclear fear, yet one of its most decisive battles had already been fought with wheat, steel, credits, and plans. No shots were fired, but a border was drawn.